When I realized that there was that role that you could play in life, that's what I wanted to do.
People differ tremendously in their temperaments, and to think that there's a warrior temperament is a perfectly reasonable thing to think. I mean, there's been whole cultures, many cultures, who were devoted to fostering that warrior mentality, where if you weren't like that, you were the outlier. I would say that's probably true of most human cultures across most of time. We've been fortunate enough to live in relatively peaceful times, at least the vast majority of us, so the necessity for that, like right at the edges of actual warfare, is much less than it might be under other historical circumstances. But it's a deep part of many people's nature. And so the question is, what do you do with that? And then when they see people do the bad things, they're actually really deeply attracted by that, because it speaks to part of them that could go beyond the rules. And that's actually a necessary part. It's a really necessary part. Like, you don't make men safe by making them weak. In fact, they're much more dangerous when they're weak. Let's say warrior mentality, that's a deep part of their temperament. And then you have some choices about what you might do with that. You might try to discipline it and bring it under voluntary control and integrate it into your character, in which then it can make you someone who's stalwart and indomitable and who will move forward, in the face of tremendous risk.
You sort of have this criminal mindset that you've somehow harnessed and you keep under control most of the time.
Yeah.
And occasionally it does get out of hand, and we got guys that get in trouble, and that happens.
Break rules when necessary. Now, the question is, when is that necessary? Well, that's sort of the ultimate ethical choice. Why did you decide to step into a disciplined structure? Because then it's not merely a matter of following a set of arbitrary rules. It's following a set of rules that have a clear path to success. Right? That's a very different thing. And that's also something that's honest, because the rules of the game are well established, and then if you play it properly, you get to win. And that's a big deal as well. And I've met a number of people like that. They're capable of breaking rules, let's say, or maybe even inclined to break them. First of all, you had to be disciplined, that's for sure. But you also had to integrate that part of you that was terrible and capable of breaking rules and make it part of you. And so then, again, in the Harry Potter stories, you see he's touched by evil, right? He actually has a soul fragment that's embedded within him that's as black as anything can possibly be. That's why he could talk to snakes. But without that, he wouldn't be able to have any victory. And that's exactly right psychologically. Unless you can think the way that an evil person thinks, then you're defenseless against them, because they'll go places you can't imagine, and then they win. A harmless man is not a good man. A good man is a very, very dangerous man who has that under voluntary control. There are variants of hero archetypes that are relevant to women, and one of them is Beauty and the Beast. And Beauty isn't interested in the guy who isn't the Beast. She's interested in the guy who's the Beast. And that's exactly right, but she's interested in the guy who's the Beast that can be civilized and disciplined.
Let me transition from being, mentally insecure about who I was as a person to being, okay, I'm actually good with who I am. Number one was learning how to fight. All of a sudden, when I looked at other people, I wasn't posturing. I wasn't trying to pretend that I was tough. I knew that most people that I would encounter, I could defeat in a physical altercation. That was number one. Number two was going into combat. Because even though you might be tough in a street fight or in a fist fight with someone, when you're facing death, well, that's a whole nother level. And for me, going into combat, well, what was I going to act like? Was I going to be scared? Was I going to be a coward? Was I going to be scared of death? And when I went into combat, I wasn't. I was fine. I was okay with the fact that I could die, and I was okay with that. And I made good decisions and did what I was supposed to do. And the last one was I got married and had kids. Because all of a sudden, all these things, these being aggressive and working to fight and be able to destroy in an efficient way, well, then I took that and combined it with, okay, now I'm going to take care of my wife and our children, and that's what I'm going to do. And my point in giving this speech was he was a guy that had learned how to fight. He was a guy that had been in combat, and now there was one more step to take.
But
Crazy, but it
well,
reinforces what you always say, which is that there's deeper meaning. There's a reason why I'm thinking that. And the reason is because of the things that you talk about and the way these things are overlaid throughout history for human beings to have gotten to this point.
Yeah, well, you acted it out, which is what you're supposed to do, and it's better to act it out and to understand it. That's best. It's better to understand it and not act it out than to not understand it at all. But the best is to act it out and understand it. Then the way that you represent the world and yourself is in accordance with the way that you act, and that's optimized.
Yeah, and it's something that I was kind of acting out. Again, no real guide. Like my guidelines were like I was raised in the SEAL teams. Yeah, that was sort of my guidelines. And here's a good example. When I first got in the SEAL teams, there was no war going on. So what did a good SEAL do? You know what you did? You went out and drank and got in bar fights. That's what a good SEAL did. So you know what I did? Went out and drank, got in bar fights. That's what I'm supposed to do. It took me a while to figure out, no, there's actually something more than that. Like we're actually supposed to be preparing for war. And so now, like you said, I definitely acted things out and sort of was on a decent path, but as I got older and more mature, and to this day, as I can look around and actually overlay the understanding on the way I've carried out my life, it's very helpful to me, and it also helps me explain it to other people that see the path that I'm on, go, they like that path. They would like to join me on that path. There's guys that would work for me, or guys that would be around me, and they'd see me and they'd kind of latch on to the fact that I was tough and aggressive. And some of those guys, they wouldn't catch the other part, which was that I was politically savvy and I was working and I was maneuvering and I was, figuring things out and talking to my boss in such a way that we could get where we needed to be. And I was doing that whole other side. And so I'd get these guys that would end up not doing as well as they should do because they were just, hey, Jocko's just ultra aggressive and he gets after it. And so that's what I'm going to do and I'll be in the same place. The guys that would do well are the guys that said, oh yeah, Jocko's awesome and he's aggressive and he gets after it. He's also working and he's also maneuvering and he's also massaging the egos of the people around him. So make sure that they get positioned in the right spot where they can go to war in the right way. As I've gotten older, I've been able to tell people that more clearly. Like, hey, it's not just about that side of the ultra aggressive. You got to be aggressive. You got to be willing to fight. You got to be willing to kill, and you got to be willing to die. At the same time, you got to be able to temper all those things in such a way that they can be controlled and disciplined.
Well, I also think that that's part of what makes a world peaceful in the final analysis, because if you're around people who are dangerous but disciplined, then everyone watches their step, and that's exactly what should happen. Everybody should watch their step